come, a little sunshine for your morning. There is a pair of cardinals that have lived in our yard for the 3 years that we have lived in our house. And actually, each year at about this time, I become aware that, in fact, we live in the cardinals' yard. That they know our yard and the trees and the creatures around it so much better than we do. And we watch them from the kitchen window and come home to them perched in the wires over our heads, often singing. It's such a sweet season this spring, even when it rains, when we are reminded of all of our living neighbors, and when we get to see all kinds of mothers and parents tending their young in all kinds of ways. Whose yard do you live in? What furred or feathered mother have you seen at work in the world in this first week of May? Lily Myers will light our chalice this morning in honor of all of the ways that we care for each other on this earth. And I invite you to say the words of our covenant, which are printed in the order of service. Love
is the doctrine of this church. Christ for truth is the sacrament, and service is his prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to respect the nurturing power within all of us. Thus we covenant.
I invite you to join in singing hymn 392, Kine Matov. The choir will sing the part that's in Hebrew for us, and then we'll sing it in English after they lead us in the English part. And then after we've sung the whole hymn together in English, we'll turn it into a round. And you can just follow the choir if you're not a natural born round singer. And if you love to play with rounds, you will hear the round begin to turn through the congregation. Please join in 392.
Together,
morning, Tony Tufts, Chair of the Board, would like to talk with us a little bit more about what it means to have a mission statement. Thank you, Tony.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Tim Berry writes, I've had a 30-year love-hate relationship with mission statements. I've read thousands. I love it when a mission statement defines an organization so well that it feels like strategy. And that does happen. And I hate it when a mission statement is generic, stale, and completely useless. Your mission statement is your opportunity to define goals, ethics, culture, and norms for decision-making. The vast majority of the mission statements are just meaningless hype that could be used to describe any organization in the category. People write them because some checklist or expert said they had to. There are actually websites that poke fun at how most mission statements use vague, high-sounding phrases to say nothing. The comic strip Dilbert has had a field day making fun of them. Wally, your status report is just a bunch of buzzwords strung together. I've been giving you that same status report every week for 11 years. 5 years ago, you adopted it as our mission statement. A well-developed mission statement is a great tool for understanding, developing, and communicating fundamental objectives, and should be expressed in just a paragraph or two. If you read it out loud, it should take about 30 seconds, and it should answer questions people have about your organization, like who are you, what do you do, what do you stand for, and why do you do it? Berry continues, I've never written anything that wasn't better with editing, and most of what I've written was better after I cut it to half its original length. After creation of a mission statement, Berry suggests that the next step is listening. Show drafts to others. Ask their opinions and really listen. Don't argue, don't convince them, just listen. And then edit again. And for the rest of your organization's life, review and revise the mission statement as needed. Your mission statement should never get written in stone, and much less stashed in a drawer. Use it or lose it. Review and revise as necessary, because change is constant. This week we will send out some potential mission statements for you to consider. And in the weeks and months ahead, we will engage in a further listening process. We will schedule meetings, and the usual suspects will attend. This work is too important to be tended to by only the usual suspects. So we will look to find ways to effectively broaden this conversation. Please help us in this. Thank you.
It's a joy to have Lily play the piano for us this morning. Welcome, Lily. our children and their leaders out to the church.
Okay, you ready?
Saw the youngest member of our congregation go out the door there. You probably haven't had a chance to meet Willow yet, but I think she's a month old. Is she a month old now?
Yes.
This reading is a poem by Nikki Giovanni entitled Mothers. Nikki Giovanni is one of the best-known African-American writers in our country today. She was born in Tennessee and raised in Cincinnati and lived her life on the leading edge of social change. She attended college in the 60s and was expelled for inappropriate behavior, which in her moment meant that she was not being a proper, quiet young lady, but was being an independent, outspoken activist. And a few years after they expelled her, they got a new dean for women who invited her to come back and threw out the file that they had kept on her for being inappropriate. They had her back because they could see that she was smart and ready to take on the world, and they wanted that and were no longer worried about her being a proper young lady. And she never has been a proper young lady. She's been a poet and an activist and a musician. She has as many music CDs out as she has books of poetry, I think. And as she says, she has been a dreamer her whole life. She has advocated for African American people, for women, and more recently for rap and hip hop artists. In her online biography, she says, "I think I was lucky because I was always sniffling. Colds, allergies, something or other, which meant that I got to stay home from school a lot. Which meant that I could read the books I wanted to read. My mother had a wonderful library." And she also says, "I am 71 years old. I highly recommend old age. It's fun. I like to cook, travel, and dream. I'm a writer and I am happy." Mothers. The last time I was home to see my mother, we kissed, exchanged pleasantries and unpleasantries, pulled a warm, comforting silence around us, and read separate books. I remember the first time I consciously saw her. We were living in a 3-room apartment on Burns Avenue. Mommy always sat in the dark. I don't know how I knew that, but she did. That night, I stumbled into the kitchen, maybe because I've always been a night person, perhaps because I had wet the bed. She was sitting on a chair. The room was bathed in moonlight, diffused through those thousands of panes landlords who rented to people with children were prone to put in windows. She may have been smoking, but maybe not. Her hair was 3/4 her height, which made me a strong believer in the Samson myth, and she was very black. I'm sure I hung there by the door. I remember thinking, what a beautiful lady. She was very deliberately waiting. Perhaps for my father to come home from his night job, or maybe for a dream that had promised to come by. "Come here," she said, "I'll teach you a poem." I see the moon and the moon sees me. God bless the moon and God bless me. I taught it to my son, who recited it for her, just to say that we must learn to bear the pleasures as we have borne the pains. The stories, to sing the songs, to read the poems, and to listen to each other. So if you have a story of a night of darkness or a story of shining light, I invite you to come and stand with me here at the front and speak into the microphone so that we can hear your part of this great story.
I think it does help sometimes to tell about sadness. I like it when people talk about joy, but I'm sad and was awake last night over two things. One is that my son Paul has been diagnosed with prostate cancer and will have to have a lot of radiation treatments. And the other is that his two sons yesterday afternoon were working in the restoration of a house that Peter has bought in downtown Providence. And Peter dropped a screw gun on the top of Leaf's head, which was sliced right down the middle. And of course, you feel sorry for both of them. And so that's why I didn't sleep very well last night.
I have two joys to share with you this morning. First is that my grandson in St. Petersburg, Florida, has two daughters that were born early in February. So I now have 19 and 20 great-grandchildren. I mean, it's not that I'm a young chick or anything, I'm 94. But I thought I would share the pleasure of having so many kids with you. The other pleasure is that Bobby, the lady, my significant other, the lady with whom I live, survived a carotid artery cleansing operation the other day, and she's back home, and she doesn't feel very well. I know she's all right physically, because she gave me hell about what a mess the apartment was. In 3 days in the hospital, there's a big mess already. At any rate, she's back, and we're very happy to be back together again. That's my other joy.
I'm Martin Myers, and so, of course, my first joy today is to get to listen to Lily play this morning. But I also, Sujung and I had an interesting evening last night because for 3 hours we had no kids at home, which was a joy because we got to, make a simple dinner together and just spend a little time together, and also kind of a precursor of maybe what it'll be like a long time out in the future, which will probably be a mix of joy and sadness. And finally, yesterday was wonderful because some friends unexpectedly invited us out to a lovely lunch, which was just delightful. So, all kinds of fun and interesting and sometimes sad things going on.
I'm sharing this for Jim because he was like, you really ought to share this. When we first started fostering, we had been given care of a little girl who was 6 months old, and her little system had lots of junky, unhealthy food in it, like sick food. So the first few days were really tough, and then she was coming along. And 6 days into it, the mom went to court and said, I am never moving back to the seacoast. I don't care what the state thinks. I'm starting my life out west, Claremont, and you're going to have to move my baby. And the judge said yes. So we tucked this precious bundle of love into bed. And then we went down and had our dinner and cried and said horrible things about the judge. Yesterday we went to the foster and adoptive thank the family's picnic yesterday. And we got to meet the most charming, tallest 4-year-old girl we've ever met with her new mommy and daddy. And during foster care classes, you go through a class called Connections. And me being me, I'm like, yeah, that's academic, yeah, we're all connected, la, 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 la. And then you start being a foster parent. And we only had her for 11 days. And yet, we love Zendaya. We are so happy for her and her brown mommy and brown daddy, and she's as lily white Irish girl as you'll ever see. And life is good. Consider foster care.
We hear of how much love holds us together and how painful it is when we love each other deeply. I invite you into a time of meditation or your own practice of prayer. You might, in this time, watch your mind to see if there is a fragment of poetry or a few words that help hold you through this wild blend of pleasure and pain. These words might be your mantra for holding steady and staying present for whatever it is that comes into your life. May this time of quiet deepen our compassion. I want to say a few things that need to be said on Mother's Day, probably every Mother's Day. One is that not every household has a mother, and they are just the same as households that do have mothers. Some of them are humming and happy, and some of them are struggling, and most of them are some of each. Households of humans are like that, regardless of genders or generations. Secondly, a lot of people have a hard time on this day. A mother whose child has died mourns on this day. A child whose mother has died at any age mourns on this day. Children and mothers who have difficult or hurtful relationships mourn and even rage on this day. And everyone else wrestles with competing needs and expectations, longings and hope. Kindness and awareness serve us well. And one other thing that I think needs to be said, this day was not started as a you need to buy some things for your mother day. It was started by a mother to honor what is most dear to a mother's heart, the well-being of her children. Julia Ward Howe, UU founder of Mother's Day, said in her proclamation, some of you have this proclamation in your order of service. I printed it for later in the morning, and some of you have it and a few of you don't. So share with your neighbors if someone is wanting to read the proclamation in the service today. In her proclamation, she says, "We women of one country will be too tender to those of another to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs." It is this spirit of mothers around the world banding together to protect each other's children and our own that inspired Mother's Day. This is why we have a peace march on Mother's Day now, as they do in a Boston neighborhood that has been marked by gang violence for years, and I think in many other communities. They have marches and times of standing up for the care of children. It's social activism, but really it's just what Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And the poem that I read this morning by Nikki Giovanni is about the most private kind of love. The exchange between a young child and her mother in the darkness of a small apartment. Just those two lives in the dim light of the moon. It's a poem about one of those in-between moments. The mother is waiting there in the darkness, and the daughter is at the edge of sleep and standing in the doorway. And that is the moment that becomes a first memory, a profile in moonlight. And in that moment of in-between, the poet receives the gift of a poem to know by heart. This is a moment of connection and understanding, a giving and receiving of one of the profound gifts of life. This is a person who went on to be a poet, who went on to live into those words of poetry that sprang up in the night. And it's not a sentimental poem. It is not all moonlight and poetry. It has bedwetting and a father working the night shift and someone maybe smoking or maybe not, and tenement windows, and no life or relationship is simple or easy here. There is this beautifully complex moment in the poem when the poet says, she, the mother, was waiting very deliberately, perhaps for my father to come home, or maybe for a dream that had promised to come by. Come here, she said. I love that moment because you can't tell at first hearing if the mother is saying, come here to the dream that had promised to come by, or whether she has turned and addressed the child hanging in the doorway there. And it goes a little unresolved, as it does when we're half asleep. Things can be both awake and asleep, both dream and child. And clearly, it is the child who is addressed in the end, loved and tended by the mother, whether the child is the dream or the dream and the child are two things passing through the room. There is so much unfolding in even the smallest moment of our tender family lives. The poem holds childhood truths and adult truths together. And they are indeed both true things, true experiences, and both profound. The childhood truth is that her mother is just a mythic presence in her life. The living embodiment of the Samson and Delilah myth, the beauty shining in the nighttime, the giver of poetry to the person who goes on to live in words. This childhood truth, this earliest anchoring memory, is then framed by the perspective of an adult child visiting her mother. In that first stanza, and then at the very end, the poet refers to her mother as mother, but then in the middle she calls her mommy. I see her slipping between those two realities as we all do. And that little fragment of the poem about the moon bridges the speaker and the reader from childhood into adulthood, back to the adult world, where the speaker has her own child and is navigating again between the defined worlds of pleasure and pain. In childhood, I think that those two worlds aren't as clearly defined. They mingle in one experience of living. Much as I have always struggled with the way that Mother's Day has been commercialized, I very much appreciate that it is a day when we honor the mythic in mothers, when we honor the fact that they have such a huge presence in our innermost lives, for better and for worse. In a practical world, we tend to underestimate the ways that our mothers fill our most essential self. In this poem, there is a profound sense of love and being gifted by that mythic mother. And there are many people sitting here today who tell stories of being undercut or dismissed by that earliest maternal presence. Being a mother now, I understand more deeply how much humans need to have deep in their hearts, in their souls, in their minds, however you want to frame it. We humans need a presence that is powerful and beautiful and loving and supportive. It is not important whether that person is a man or a woman, but that they be life-giving and embracing. That when you're standing there in the edge, in the doorway, they say, "Oh, come here." And if your mother couldn't do that for you, hopefully your father could. And if he couldn't either, I hope that there was another person in your life who you found, who gave you that welcoming grounding. And if there's still something missing, I think we really should form a group and get together and write some notes to that innermost child. maybe just little poems about the moon. That little one who is awake in the night, maybe having trouble sleeping, maybe just a night person who needs to be welcomed, who needs some light to always carry with them. Because the child, any child, deserves that. And that is a word that I almost never use, deserve. It's a pretty loaded word, and it has some weird Puritan judgment in it, and you know how I feel about the Puritans. And I'll do a longer sermon in the near future about wrestling with the word deserves. But I will say here, unreservedly, that our littlest selves, our youngest awake in the night selves, deserve a clean, clear love and a gift to have for your innermost being. You get to have someone to admire like they are a divine being right there in your kitchen, and a grounding for yourself in the world. And then you also get to have that adult perspective on that person with their struggles and imperfections and shortcomings. And it is in our religious tradition to hold out that kind of love for all people. That is part of our Universalist heritage. The Universalists looked around the world and said, you don't need to say there's a hell. The suffering that's happening here is the only hell there is, and there is a great love waiting to embrace all people. And so it is our work as religious people to bring that loving embrace to the world. That's our heritage, and that is the gift that we get to give each other, and then try to make that embrace as wide as we can. And that is part of the work of Mother's Day, to celebrate the mothers and to bring that embracing, welcoming love everywhere we can. So if you have beautiful, pleasant memories of your mother, do cherish them and share them. And if you can share a comforting silence and words of blessing, do so. And if there is a gap, a wound, or a longing, light a candle this morning. Let it stand in for that moonlight. I would give you the moon if I could. Your good, sweet self deserves it. We take up an offering because the community needs care and the consistent attention of all who participate in it. This is how we are good neighbors to each other, each doing what we can when we can, remembering that we depend on each other as we create this community together. Please do light a candle this morning for mothers and moons and memories and muddling through. There are candles in 4 places this morning so that we can have plenty of light. The morning offering for all of the ways of mothering in this congregation will now be received. Please remain standing and keep singing hymn 409, Sleep, My Child. Put out the light of the chalice in this room, but take that flickering bit of moonlight out into the world and love everything. Please join in the unison benediction. The words are printed in the order of service. Go in peace.
Seek truth, give thanks each day. Respect the earth and all creatures, for they are alive like you. Care for your body, it is a wondrous gift.